So I'm going to turn this over to our solicitor, Mr. Tights.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Please take a seat. We do have other seats here. And by the way, I will only be calling on people who are sitting or standing in the back. If you're sitting on the front row, you get an automatic exemption. You won't be called on. So there's 3 seats up front here. Feel free to take them, and you know you're safe. I think most of you know me. Probably you know me better than I know you. You've seen me sitting up here or on TV. But I will take the time to introduce myself a little bit more. I am Andy Tights. I'm the town solicitor for Tiverton. And I've been doing this now, seems hard to believe, but for 4 years now. And it's been a while. The very first thing I did officially in Tiverton was something similar to this. Back sometime in the late 1980s, 1990s, I think, I did something in connection with statewide planning department and the planning board and zoning board here in Tiverton, and I did a training program here in this town. It was kind of the first official thing that I had ever done here in the town. And it's overdue, needs to be done periodically. Because there are lots of new members that get appointed or elected to various boards and commissions. There are people who've been around for a while and who've gotten used to things, and we assume that's the proper way to do it because we've always done it that way, and it may or may not be. And also the law itself changes over time. So it is kind of important to do this. I do have a bit of a perspective that encompasses all of the different views. I'm the town solicitor here. My firm represents 4 other towns in Rhode Island. So I've got that municipal view of sitting on the side of the table where you are. I've been there next to the planning board, next to the zoning board, next to the historic district commissions. I've been there for all those meetings. In the other 34 cities and towns, I've represented private clients. So I've been on the other side of the table and dealt with the frustrations and the issues and the concerns on that side of the table. I was involved with the General Assembly and writing much of the land use legislation in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. So I've kind of been on all sides of it. I think if I have a bias, and I like to believe I don't, but I probably do, it's probably on the municipal side, on this side here, representing you as your lawyer, which is the role I'm in tonight. Again, for new people coming in, we do have a couple of seats around here and a couple of seats in front, and I promise not to call on the people who sit in the front row, so it's safe to sit here. This is an introductory course, 101, if you would. It's an appetizer, trying to just cover in a short time, and I do hope to be done by 9 o'clock, the key issues of what you need to know about your authority and responsibilities, focusing mainly on due process, open meetings, open records, and the ethics issues. That's the main goal here to cover, just as an introduction to that. You might think of this as the appetizer. There is going to be a 3-course dinner served later in the month. Grow Smart Rhode Island does periodic programs, and they're doing one called Making Good Land Use Decisions at a location in Tiverton, to be determined the exact location, but it's going to be 3 Thursdays, January 22nd, January 29th, and February 12th. As I said, it's going to focus on land use issues, mainly for town council members, zoning board, planning board members. But others are welcome. I have about 50 of these sheets up front. If you want to come up afterwards at the end and pick one up, you're more than welcome to do it. You can also get them online from Grow Smart RI. There is a fee that they charge because, among other things, they feed you. They start at 5:30, give you a meal first, and then start right away so they can get a lot in and still get you out by 9 o'clock. It's not on our agenda, so I can't do it tonight, but at next Monday's council meeting, I will find out if perhaps the council will be willing to pay for the fee for board members who are not otherwise being. I understand the planning board's already planning to pay for it out of their, they have a budget item for it, but for the rest of you, I'll find out if the council will be willing to do it. For those of you who feel that you want and need more of this. As I said, that will be angled toward land use, but it will cover a lot more of this in depth. There will be a little of overlap. If you look at it, you'll see, oh, I'm talking about your role as a public official, and the first part of the first night for this is your role as a public official. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, although even that will be tilted more towards the planning and zoning. For example, the only time periods notice that I'm going to be talking about tonight are the Open Meetings Act and the 48 hours. When we get to Thursday the 22nd, we'll be talking about 3 weeks' notice for zoning amendments and 14 days for zoning and board actions and things like that. We'll be specifically talking about more of the details. So I do want to invite you to that and encourage you to attend that. Tonight, I'm going to try to get through the key issues. And I want to start off at the beginning, though, of reminding you that you do have a lawyer. The town of Tiverton has a lawyer. You have more than one. There's a whole firm behind me. There's also Peter Ruggiero and his firm, specifically with the Planning and Zoning Board. And I want to urge you to ask any questions you want tonight. But also specifically if in the future, if you've got questions, if it's just like the next day or two and there's something, oh, I wish I should have asked that question. Or as you go on and you've got specific questions, particularly chairmen or chairwomen of the particular boards and commissions, and you've got issues and you don't normally have the lawyer there with you at your meeting, I want you to encourage to ask the questions. Now, I do want to encourage you to do it through the town administrator, Mr. Gonzalo, because other than the town council members, the rest of you aren't supposed to be calling me up directly all the time, because that starts running up the expenses. So I want to urge you to go through him. But please do that. And if it's an emergency, I've had this, well, actually, it's a call from Nancy at 6:30 when meeting's at 7 o'clock, wasn't posted exactly, what do we do? So if you need to, there's an emergency, don't hesitate to contact me. It's better that you ask first than call me afterwards and say, yeah, well, you know, we did this. Is that going to get us in trouble? Because we're both going to feel awful when my answer is, yep, you're in trouble. So do it first. Take advantage of that resource which you have. Tonight, I'm going to encourage you to ask questions too. Interrupt at any time. If you got any questions, just speak up, raise your hand. If I'm not paying attention, don't see you, cough, shout, whatever, hey you. Now, I may postpone the answer. I may not answer it right away. I might say we're going to cover it in a later section and come back to it. But I do encourage you to ask them. And as I said, I'm going to try to get through this by 9 o'clock. But if you want to hang around afterwards, if you've got questions, please feel free to do. This I expect to be that opportunity, so that if you've got issues that have come up or you think may come up, now's your chance to get them out. I do apologize. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so I may be coughing. Hopefully I got enough water here to keep me from getting hoarse before the end of the night. Any questions before I start? Okay.
I have a question, yes, sir.
Sure.
Why are there 4 consecutive meetings always on the same evening, so that if persons have schedules that are where Thursdays are assigned for those particular obligations, they are totally out of the loop?
Well, it's the way that GrowSmart sets it up, and as I said, it's primarily for the Zoning and Planning Board, so it's designed to avoid a conflict with their regular meetings. What you need to do is keep your eye out, or if you email GrowSmart, they do this all over the state. And so different communities that have different meetings on different times, it will almost always be like that sequence of 3 Wednesdays in a row, 3 Mondays in a row, 3 Thursdays. But if you get a problem with Thursday, there might be one later in the spring down in Newport, for example, or Middletown, that might be on 3 Tuesdays in a row. And you're welcome to attend them. You don't have to attend it in the community that you live in. Obviously, that's where most of the people will be, but you can attend them anywhere. So, any other questions? The first thing that we're talking about is the public interest. And the public interest is a kind of broad format. What's the public interest? What do we mean when we say the public interest? And really, all that we mean when we say the public interest is by what it's not. It's not a special interest. It's not just the people in the room. No matter how many people pack the room, no matter how vocal they are, that's not the public. The public is at large, and for pretty much everyone here, it's all of the residents of the town of Tiverton. That's your public. It's who's going to benefit from the decision. Sometimes it's going to be just one individual who's going to benefit. Sometimes it will be a group. Sometimes there will be a benefit for all. Most of the time, there'll be some sort of compromise or weighing that goes on. There will be a choice that will be made. We're weighing the benefit and the rights of one individual to do something versus the problems and the costs to the whole, or perhaps the other way, the benefit to the whole and what are the costs to the individuals. So the public benefit extends beyond just the individual applicant. It also extends beyond just the people, even the current residents here, to future generations where possible. And I know that's something that this town in particular and the town council has been dealing with as we deal with questions of polluted soil. And we're looking for solutions and answers, not just for people who are here today, but what about the future generations? What about the safety? It also that affects a lot of the capital budgeting decisions that we make, that we may not be around to enjoy or appreciate, but they will affect the future generations of the town. One of the key things that you can do as far as the public interest is make sure that the public knows what it is you're doing. And that's kind of where we're coming in to the next section about acting within your legal authority. Once upon a time, all the authority divested from the king. I hear a lot of pages flipping, and that's fine. But I'm not going to read through this because you'd be awful bored if I did. I'm going to follow it roughly as the outline. Please feel free to follow along with me, but don't be surprised when I go off on other tangents and so forth. This is for you to have also in the future to review. I do actually also have the particular statutes, the Open Meeting Act and the Open Records Act. I only made 20 copies of each of them now. I didn't want to unnecessarily kill any more trees, but they're up there if you want to come and get them. And if they run out, you want more, Nancy's got them. She can easily make copies, the actual statute, if you want to read it yourself. But the authority was originally, if you go back, we go back thousands and thousands of years, but I'm just going to go back 1,000 years, and our Anglo-Saxon jurisprudential system, and it relates to the king. The king had all the authority. William the Conqueror, whose official name was William the Bastard because of his illegitimate birth, but after he successfully claimed the throne of England and after the conquest, got a better name. And William the Conqueror was the one who made all the rules and laws, divided up all the land, parceled it out to all the barons and people who had fought for him in conquering the country. And that was the source of the law. And even then, there was a delegation. He couldn't be everywhere at every time, so he delegated a lot of that power to the barons. And over several centuries of struggle, a various power balance appeared. And one of the key elements of that is the year 1215 and what we call the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which was basically at that point dividing some of the authority, saying, no, it's not with the king's thought. He can't be arbitrary and capricious and just make the laws and give people property and then take it away without due process of law. It comes all the way back there from the 1200s, that idea that there were limits. Is it what we know as democracy now? No, not by a long shot. But it was a major stop in limiting the power and dividing out how that power would be applied. And just so you know, there were several charters that King John signed. He would go have a war with his barons, they'd settle, they'd sign a charter. He'd go off to France, they'd rise up, he'd come back, there'd be another fight, he'd sign another one. Oftentimes he would rip up the charter when he came back with his army. But it just so happened that he died shortly after the 1215 charter, and leaving a young son in the hands of a regent, and so therefore this charter stuck. There wasn't a strong king for a certain number of years, and this charter stuck. What does it have to do today? It is the direct ancestral link between that and the authority you have today. Your authority traces back through Magna Carta, then going through the various elements of the non-written English Constitution to the Rhode Island Charter of King Charles II, and the Rhode Island Constitution of 1844, and the current Rhode Island Constitution, and the General Assembly, which is delegated to the town of Tiverton through its own charter, which as a town you just amended a few months ago. That's your delegation of authority. That's where your power comes from. You both have certain power to do things and certain limits and restrictions coming from the General Assembly through the town council to you as members of the various boards and bodies. And some of you where you've got, like the Budget Committee, where it's independently elected, it doesn't come directly from the council, but it comes directly through the charter. But even that charter is coming through the General Assembly because the General Assembly will be approving, we hope, that charter when they reconvene and it's submitted to them. So that's where your power comes from. It's not limited. There are limits to the power. And one of the key things that the limitation is on your power is the concept of due process. And due process is a term that you'll probably hear a lot. You've heard a lot of. Oh, it's not due process. And what is due process? Due process, in a nutshell, is fairness. It's that 5-year-old whose toy has just been snatched away by his brother. And the mother comes in and yells at him for making all the noise and racket and screaming. But it's not fair. That's what due process is. Due process in that thing would be the mother convening a hearing, calling witnesses, not the 2 boys who are fighting over the toys, but uninterested, disinterested witnesses who saw what happened and making a determination before imposing that arbitrary sentence. Obviously, it's not possible in that situation, but it is possible in your situation. You want to make sure that what you are seen to do is fundamentally fair. And due process has 2 key elements in it: procedural due process and substantive due process. And procedural due process is basically following your own rules, following the rules. You should have rules of procedure. They should be written, and they should be published, available to people. I can't tell you the times in the past when I would ask about, oh, are there rules of procedure for this board? Yep, sure. Can I have a copy? No. We don't have any copies around. We gave them out to the board members. We don't have any copies. Fortunately, technology has actually kind of helped that, because at least now most everybody says, oh, well, I could print you out another copy from the computer if I have it. In the old days, they'd be printed on a printer. They'd actually be printed and bound, and they had a number of copies, and when they were gone, and you just couldn't see the rules. So how do you know if the process is being followed, if the rules are being followed, if you don't even know the rules? That's kind of the fundamental first step, is to make sure that there are the rules and that they're available to people, and then to follow them, and to give people notice of what's going on and an opportunity to be heard. Those are really the key elements of procedural due process. Do people have an opportunity to, at the very least, come and see and hear what their government is doing, and in certain situations, to be able to participate in that? Many of the things that you do as boards and commissioners, entail public hearings, and you need to listen to the people. And that means giving them the opportunity, what we call a meaningful public hearing, that the decision hasn't been made ahead of time, and you're actually going to let them present their opinion. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's a balancing. When you've got 50 people who are against something and 10 people who are for it, and the 50 people who are against it all stand up first and are determined to take the entire night so that the 10 people on the other side never get a chance. Sometimes due process and fairness is putting time limits on those 50 people and saying, no, you can't just keep repeating what was said. Move on, keep it moving. We've got to hear everybody. Or continuing it to another night so that everybody gets heard. Sometimes due process is not just letting everybody speak forever. There are limits and there are boundaries on it. But that's the key elements of procedural due process. Substantive due process is a little bit more nebulous. It's more along the lines of I know it when I see it. It's more of that fairness. But it's the idea is is what happens at this meeting really where the decision's going to be made? And if it's a public hearing, is there an opportunity that somebody's mind might be changed by what I'm going to say? Or is it not because someone, in the worst case scenario, someone's been paid off? Or perhaps in a lesser case scenario, somebody's buddies are all on one side of the issue, so it's going to go that way? Or is it just that, you know, this is it, people have made up their mind, they're just not going to listen? That's where you're lacking substantive due process. And it has to be significant to be a violation. Courts don't often find substantive due process violations unless they do find real malfeasance, some quid pro quo, which we're going to get to in a bit as far as the ethics that affected a decision. But it's something to be mindful when you're there, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, about the appearance of it too. Is what you do not only fair, but does it appear fair? Because in the end, we've got this government system here that relies on all of you volunteers out here. And if you don't operate the way your particular board or commission or committee operates, doesn't seem fair to the people, then they're not going to participate in the process, and new people aren't going to want to join and become members of the board as terms expire, and the whole process will end up disintegrating. And instead of this rather unique American system of government we have with all these local boards and committees, we could end up with like some of the other, a lot of countries in the world where there aren't any. There's no zoning board, there's just an official. There's someone you go to, there's one person, it's his decision and his decision alone, and if you don't like it, there may or may not be a court of law. There isn't a body of your peers which you can make your argument and present your case to. There isn't a deliberative function that's out there in the public. So it's very important that this process work and both work and appear to work fairly. The simplest question is often just to ask yourself, is this fair? Is what I'm doing fair? If someone's complaining, if there are a lot of people out there complaining, no, this isn't fair. Ask yourself that. Is this fair? Does it look fair? That's the due process issues. Let's talk specifically about the statutes that make your life most miserable as board and commission members at this time. And probably number one's the Open Meetings Act. And as I said, there's a complete copy over here. And in your materials, starting at page 5 and 6 are the exceptions to which meetings can be closed. And we'll get to that. Because here again, as I said, fundamental due process was talking about, you know, what it is and what it isn't. And it's the same thing. Basically, open meetings, the first precept is every meeting of all public bodies shall be open unless an exception applies. So basically, your default provision on open meetings is it's open. It's got to be an open meeting. It's only if there's some exception that it doesn't. If it's not there as an exception, if it's not listed, if somebody forgot about it and it hasn't been yet dealt with by the General Assembly, then it's an open meeting. Now, what are some of the definitions that you deal with? First of all, a public body. A public body is basically pretty much any department, agency, commission, committee, board, council, bureau, or authority, or any subdivision thereof of state or municipal government. I think there's no question that pretty much everybody here, with the exception of some of the staff members, and even then, not necessarily, you're part of a public body. All the boards, zoning board, planning board, conservation commission, budget committee. I don't know if do we have any school committee members here? You're all public bodies. So there's no question that you're subject to it. And it also includes any kind of meetings. It includes workshops, work sessions. This is technically a meeting of the town council. It's a town council workshop, but it is technically that meeting. If we'll talk about if any of you, if a quorum of any of the boards decided why they were here, we're going to stop back in the conference room and just talk about something for a minute. that would be a public meeting. That would be a meeting. It wouldn't be a public meeting and you'd have a problem, but that would be a meeting. So you're all public bodies, and all of the stuff that you're doing are public meetings. The general rule on this is also very broad about what you do. If you're acting on a matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Now, many people think that if you're just giving advice that it doesn't matter, that the open meeting stuff doesn't apply, it's not the same. We're just giving advice. We're not making a decision. We're not granting anything. We're just making advice, giving our advisory opinion. No, that's not an exemption. You are still a public body, and you should still be having a public meeting if, in fact, you're giving advisory opinions as well. This goes all the way up to the federal level, too. Some of you may remember back at the beginning of the first Bill Clinton administration when Hillary Clinton was put in charge of health care. And they decided they're going to have this come up with this grand scheme to solve the national health care problem. And without getting into any politics, whether it was a good idea or what, the fact of the matter is they determined that they weren't meeting in public. They weren't a public body. They didn't have to meet in public. It went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the answer came back the other way. It was dealing with a public issue. They were formulating public policy. Even if they were only advisory, it would still have to be adopted by Congress and by the executive branch. It didn't matter. They were making policy. They were formulating government activities. They were a public body under the federal equivalent to this. Later, there was a similar thing with Bush and Cheney and the various energy policy. Same argument, same answer. It's a public issue, and you're a public body, and you're subject to it. With you here, it's pretty much not a question because all of you are, in fact, officially appointed members and so forth, and bodies, there's really no question. So, is there anybody here who believes that the Open Meeting Act doesn't apply to them? Okay. So let's talk about what's a meeting. The general rule is if you've got a quorum, you got a meeting. If you got a 5-member board, you got 3 members together, you've got a meeting. That's the general rule. Now, there are interpretations. You know, when people ask me the question, Andy, what about this? You know my answer, probably many of you heard, yes and no. So there are various exceptions and situations. I mean, if you're in the coffee shop, if one of you is in the coffee shop and 2 more walk in, does that suddenly make it a meeting? No, it doesn't. It has to be where you're dealing with the issues, where you're discussing the issues. If one of you is in the coffee shop and 2 of you walk in, and the 3 of you sit down at a table in the coffee shop and start talking about a case that's before you, then yes, that's a meeting and you've just violated the law. That's really the key. Are you doing the public's business? An example the other way is the holiday party. There was a big holiday party in Bristol at which all the town council members happened to show up. They were all invited, they all came, and someone filed an open meetings complaint against it. It wasn't found to be a violation. They were there, it was a social gathering. You can have all your board there in a social gathering. As I mentioned in the materials, context is important. If you're at a cocktail party with 50 people and there happens to be all 7 counselors present, then they're not likely to find a violation. If the 7 counselors decide to have a little dinner party, even if they do all invite their spouses or significant others, but it's just that 7 or 14 alone in a closed room, even though they can swear up and down that they didn't talk any business, it's probable that the Attorney General is going to find some sort of likely violation. It's the setting and the context is important. And again, what we'll come to again and again, how does it look? What's the appearance? The appearance of impropriety is just as bad as the actual impropriety. So if you see, yes?
A couple of questions.
Sure.
In this section. Where it says there's no meeting without a quorum, if you have a duly noticed meeting and you happen not to have a quorum show up that night, can you still have a meeting? Or what exactly does that mean if there's no quorum, there's no meeting?
It means that it's to effect. It means it's kind of working in the backwards thing as far as what does apply. If you didn't have a quorum, If you've got a regularly scheduled meeting, that's a meeting, whether you've got a quorum or not. It's a meeting for the Open Records and the Open Meetings Act purposes. What you're really getting into there is Robert's Rules of Order or your rules of procedure of what you can do if you don't have a quorum. So, for example, you can always, any meeting, even without a quorum, can always take the action of setting another date for a meeting. That's something you have with Robert's Rules of Order. Other boards and commissions have different rules. A zoning board needs 5 members to hear a case, no matter what. Even though the board is 5 and with alternates, 5 is a quorum. If they don't have all 5 members, if they've only got 4 members present, they can't hear that case, that's it, they just can't do it. They can hear other cases that they have 5 members if there's a conflict, but if they only have 4 show up, that's it. All they can do is schedule it to another night. Now, you can do that. If you have a meeting like that, and I know I may go against prior advice, but if you've got a situation, you got the zoning board, only 4 people are there, you can't hold the meeting. You don't have to renotice all of those cases and hearing. Those 4 people or 3 members who show up have the authority to say, okay, we're going to continue this to tomorrow night. As long as you announce it at the meeting or the public hearing, when you're going to continue it to, where you're going to continue it, and you do it while everybody's there. You can't wait, you can't say, oh, I guess we're not going to have a meeting and sit around and everybody wanders off, and then you say, okay, let's have it tomorrow night, we'll just continue it to tomorrow night. But if everybody's there waiting, anticipation, gee, you know, I don't know where Charlie is tonight, he must have gotten stuck on his way home from Boston, we're just going to have to continue it, make the formal motions to continue the matter to the same place, Town Hall, at 7 p.m. tomorrow night, you can do that. That's the sort of thing that you can do without a quorum.
Another question is, I know for noticing, to put the agenda out,
Mm-hmm.
the law clearly says it has to be posted at 2 locations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've asked that question a couple of times, and I've never really gotten an answer, where is our second location? Assuming this bulletin board in the back is the first location.
I believe the library is the second location that the things get posted within town. Is that, I'm looking at Nancy, and the record will reflect that she is nodding yes. Yeah, the library is the second location.
And who is responsible for posting there?
The individual board that's responsible, you're responsible for posting it in the places. The clerk handles her stuff, but if your board, you should be responsible. And that is my understanding. It's the library in here, and it's the same thing when we make things available to the public. It's here at Town Hall and at the library.
Okay, and I guess the third one is, when we do that electronic filing with the Secretary of State, we get back a form like this that says, thank you, you've put it in, and this is your official proof of filing, please retain it. Who is responsible for retaining this, especially as it's CC'd to the town clerk? Is the town clerk saving these? Is it my responsibility? Who is responsible for me, for having a file of these emails back saying, yes, you met your filing?
Each board or commission is responsible, whether you have a secretary of the board who's responsible, or the chairman, whoever's submitting it, or if you've got staff, and the staff is made responsible, but it should be with that particular board, the office of that particular board, or commission, or committee. Unless the town clerk specifically says, okay, I'm undertaking this, then it should be each board, because the idea is that people should be able to go. People should be able to go into Chris Spencer's office to find out, okay, could I see the copy of the planning board notices? They should be able to go into Garrett's office and, okay, can I see a copy of the zoning board office, of the zoning board notes? Obviously, it's a little hard for boards that don't have particular offices, but you need to work out that arrangement, either directly with the clerk, or you should have a body. Basically, I would say it'd be your secretary who's responsible if no one else is specifically designated to maintain them. And you're supposed to maintain them for a year. The copies of the notice that you actually post on the bulletin board, as well as your receipts from the Secretary of State's office. It doesn't say you're supposed to retain them for a year, but it says you're supposed to retain the posted receipts for a year, so I would say those receipts should be for a year as well. The Secretary of State's office is a good, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can the second place of notification be the web in lieu of the library? No?
Not currently. Currently, the law talks about 2 places if it's a physical place. And then it also requires the Secretary of State. You can have additional notice, including like the town website. But at the moment, the law specifically talks about 2 places. The fact is, the open meetings law is well over 20 years old, just in Rhode Island iteration. It's been amended from time to time, but it really hasn't been brought up to understand what the web is and what we're using it and how we're using the internet. I'm going to talk about that a little bit when I talk about a rolling quorum thing and a listserv. There's a lot of stuff that probably would comply with the intent of the Open Meeting Act that could be done today with the internet and the web, but it's not yet allowed by what we've got on paper with the general laws. Yes.
I have a question on that same sentence. There is no meeting without a quorum. Does that mean if at the end of this workshop, 3 of the 7 council members went into the room back there and discussed an item that was going to be on their agenda, it would not be an open meetings violation because the 3 of them alone do not constitute a quorum?
Well, this is where we say yes and no. According to the Attorney General, that's correct. That would not be a violation. If 3 out of 7 went in and talked about it and didn't have any other conversations with the other 4 at any time before the meeting when they voted, the Attorney General would say that is not a violation. I disagree. I happen to think, and I would certainly advise on the side of caution, that no, any time that you're discussing official business, official things, then it becomes a meeting. I mean, the example was when the Charleston Charleston Town Council appointed a subcommittee to negotiate with the Narragansett Indian tribe. And they appointed, I think, 2 out of their 5 members to be their subcommittee. And the Attorney General said that wasn't an open meeting. Now, I think it could have perhaps not been an open meeting under the exception for litigation because they were in a lawsuit with them. But the Attorney General said, well, it wasn't a quorum, so it wasn't a meeting. I disagree with that. I think if the town council appointed a subcommittee, even if it was less than a quorum of the thing, they're conducting official business. They're going on behalf of the council, and if there wasn't some other reason not to have it as a closed meeting, it should have been subject to the open meeting. So even though it says there's no meeting without a quorum, I think you have to be very careful about that. There can be an illegal meeting without a quorum. There's no legal meeting without a quorum.
And what would be an illegal meeting without a quorum then, if it's
Well,
not
that would be it. If 3
5 out of 11 members?
Well,
would be-
what would really be is what we talk about a rolling quorum would be if those 3 members got together there and talked about it, and then they left, and each one of them called another member and said, you know, we were thinking about this, and we're wondering if you'll support what we're going to do. And that's that unusual term there, a rolling quorum. It's when you get this communication going, you know, and, oh, it's all right, because as long as we don't have everybody together, as long as we don't have a quorum all together in one place, it's okay. I can call one person, that person can call the next person, that person can call the next person, it's okay. Or the chairman can poll the members, it's okay. No, it's not. That's a rolling quorum. And also, I think many of you, well, the council particularly, but others of you know, my pet peeve, the reply all button on your email, okay? Don't use it. Tape it over. Put a little piece of tape on it that says no, okay? Because that's, in my experience, the most common violation that I see happening totally innocently is that reply all. The town administrator, not recently, because I've been hammering in but past town administrator, just send out a notice to the council weekly report. What's going on? This happened in town or something, okay? That's his job, informing the council of what's happening. One of the council members responds, but instead of just hitting reply or has a question, hits reply all, so they all see the question coming back. Then he responds to all of them. Then another one hits reply all with another question. Before you know it, you get a full-fledged meeting that's basically taking place online. So you got to be very careful about that. One exception, one very black line exception, scheduling. You can do all this stuff for scheduling only. The chairman can call all the members. Can you make a meeting Tuesday? You can use reply all for scheduling only. Send out an email to everybody. Please, I want to have a meeting either Tuesday, Thursday, or next Monday. Reply all with, you know, what your availability is for dates. For scheduling alone, it's okay. You can use a phone, you can use the computer, you can poll them for that, for scheduling only. as to having the meeting. That's the one exception. Yeah.
Quick question on the quorum. House of Lords, for instance, the quorum is just a handful of the total number of members of the House of Lords. Is there a definition of the definition of a quorum for a public body?
Yes, the default definition is a majority of the members.
So you can't set your own quorum. It's a majority of the members.
It's a majority of members, unless it's a specific statutory requirement otherwise. Like I said, zoning board, a quorum is 5, no matter what. Any other board, it's a majority. You cannot have the authority to say that a lesser number shall be a quorum to conduct business. Yes?
Using the concept of the reply all, can you send out a message to all the members of a board giving them information that might be relevant to the next meeting? Just passing along something that happened, something that's noteworthy.
Yes and no. Okay? From the Open Meetings Act position, yes. From the Open Records Act, no, unless you make sure it becomes an official document. If you're sending something to all the board members that they're going to consider at the next meeting, you've got to make sure that that's available to the public. Now, there are various means of doing it. I mean, the best way to do it is to go through your secretary or clerk or staff person so that does it. So I tell the counselors, I mean, if you've got something you want to send to everybody, send it through Nancy. She gets it. She sends it out to everybody. Then she's got the copy. It's there. Now it's a public record, which is what it should be. The public should be able to see what was going on. They can come into the clerk's office and say, I'd like to see it. It gets on then whenever if there's an agenda and it's part of the discussion item, it's there. You get it, and it becomes a proper public record. So from an Open Meetings Act standpoint, yes, you could do it. If you've got some information that you want to send to all the members, you can do it without it being an open meetings violation, but it will be a violation of the Open Records Act unless you make sure that it becomes an official document and gets into the record of decision and deliberation.
Can that be entered during the meeting that's coming up?
It should be available to the, particularly if you've got something where you've got an applicant before you, it should be available to the applicant on the same timeliness thing. You shouldn't be sending something to all the board members and then a week later it just gets entered into the record when you're at the hearing, and the applicant, you guys have been all thinking about it for a week and the applicant didn't know about it till you hit him with it then. So that's why it's not a great idea, but if you're going to do it, it should be available. It should go into the public record, just as if you were sending a letter. If you're going to send a letter to all your things, you're going to CC the file as well, so it gets there at the same time. Certainly the latest point would be at the meeting, but it should be there pretty much contemporaneously with when the other board members have it. Yeah, got everybody. All right. Chris.
In the past, as the town planner, I've had people on the planning board who would ask me a question with an email, copy everybody in on it, and then I would respond to that one person, and then other people on the planning board felt that that was, you know, an appearance of impropriety because I wasn't addressing everybody. And so, you know, you're trying to balance those two. You're saying it's better just to reply to one as opposed to the whole board?
Well, no, if it's coming from you, if it's coming from the staff person, it's a bit different than if it's coming from one of the board members. And it also depends on what it is. Are you sending the, it's a different story if one of your board members sends you an email saying, you know, I've been looking at sheet 5 of 7, and it looks like they don't have the wetlands properly delineated on that sheet. And you look at it and you send a message back. I mean, that's something that should be part of the public issue. Your response should be, I'll take a look at it. You shouldn't be responding to one or to all with that sort of question. If it's more of a general question, like, you know, what are we going to do about the CDBG? When are we how are we going to, what ranking system are we going to use for scoring our recommendations on CDBG grants? That's something, and in general, the motto I use with the council is one for one, but all for one. If one council member sends me a question, I will respond to it, but I send the response to all of the council members. But depending on what it is, that response is often not going to be till it's going to be a formal memo that will be going to a meeting. Okay, this question was raised, here's the answer. if it's concerning a particular matter or something that's deliberated. If it's more of a technical matter or not something that they're considering, then it may just be normal correspondence. It's more of a danger going amidst the board members than from staff to board member. And I think as long as you always have it in the record and have it available to the public, you've got a great safety valve there. Okay, well, there's some questions over here, and go ahead.
A commission which has 7 members, 3 vacancies. I'm getting back again to that statement, there is no meeting without a quorum, because it seems to me you said initially a meeting is a meeting. But for example, on a 7-member commission, with 3 people missing, even though an effort might have been made to fill those spots, there are 4 people for every meeting then, 12 months a year.
Right.
And I mean, in this day and age, it's quite likely that one person will be absent. What's happening then? Can there not be official meetings during that period of time?
Yes, that's right. They're not official meetings if you don't have the quorum.
So one just becomes defunct, one doesn't do one's work and so on?
That's correct. Which is why it's important to get the members. It's important to get the members and.
That seems unacceptable to me. I mean, you know, with 4 people in a group, there's a certain amount of work that can at least be done, even though you might not be able to take an official vote. You can take minutes, you can let everybody know what's happening.
The quid pro quo is, okay, one person doesn't show up, but you say, oh, well, we have 3 out of 4, so we have a quorum, and then it's a 2-to-1 vote. And then, so the quid pro quo is public policy is being made by only 2 people.
No, but suppose a vote isn't taken. But suppose a vote is postponed and then waiting for the next meeting. I'm not talking about a vote, I'm talking about a meeting. Conducting business,
Right.
all of the business that needs
Right.
to be conducted, but not voting.
No, if you don't have the quorum, you really shouldn't be doing more than just scheduling the next meeting. If you don't have a quorum, you really shouldn't be doing all the business of it.
There are several commissions currently in Tiverton that really should be defunct, should not be meeting.
I don't necessarily disagree there. I know, I mean, this is one of the reasons why this is so important, because as I was saying at the beginning, it's important that people realize how, you know, to you out there on the TV, it's important that your town function, you get involved, and that they know that, you know, that everybody's following the rules, and hopefully that will encourage people not to say, oh, it's just the same old people doing the same thing. They'll say there are rules, there are guidelines, people follow them. I think I might want to volunteer for the Conservation Commission or something like that. So, I mean, that's why this is important. Yes?
What if there's seven people, say 7, because it's an odd number. However, 2 of them, it's not filled, for whatever reason or other. They're open and vacant. So now you have 5 people on the commission. Do you need 3, or do you still need 4?
Your quorum is 4, because that's the number of your board. However, if you don't have to always have 4 votes in the affirmative, unless you've got something like planning board to grant approvals requires an absolute majority of the overall number of board members to grant approval. And that, by the way, is a deliberate attempt by the General Assembly to get planning boards to reduce their size. I know we're still out there at 9, but there were some at 15 when that was written. And it was a deliberate effort to say, okay, if you want to keep your large-sized planning board, that's fine, but you got to have an absolute majority of the members of the total number to grant approval. But absent specific requirements like that, as long as you have a quorum, you don't need that same quorum for the voting. So if you've got 4 members of your commission there, you have a quorum, you conduct business, you can pass things on 3-to-1 votes. You don't have to have 4 votes in the affirmative to do things. You can pass and make motions with 3-to-1.
So just to clarify,
Right.
be crystal clear, if we're supposed to have 7,
Right.
but 2 have vacated for whatever reason, they
Right.
became part of the council or another
Right.
board, then we need 3.
Which body are we talking about?
The Harbor Commission, which
Okay.
is 9. I used
Right.
number 7, nobody's using that.
Okay.
But 3 of our folks are now either have left due to being moved to a different
Okay.
body or whatever the
Right.
case may be.
So you
So in
need-
theory,
so
we
you
only
need-
have 6.
Pardon me?
We only have 6 at the moment. There's 3 have vacated, going back to 9.
Going back to 9, and 3 have left. So yes, you should have 5 out of that 6 show up to conduct business.
Got it.
You don't need 5 votes in the affirmative to do things, but you should have 5 people there to have the quorum.
Got it.
Again, there's a difference between, don't get, this phrase here about there's no meeting without a, no quorum without meeting without a quorum is dealing with the open meetings thing, and it's kind of the reverse of saying, it's the Attorney General saying, okay, if you just have 3 of the 7 counselors get together at someone's house to discuss policy, that's not a meeting, therefore it's not a violation. That's what that's saying. You're asking a more Robert's Rules of Order procedure question about what business can be done. I'm happy to answer it, but realize it's 2 separate, it's apples and oranges. And you gotta look at both of them. You gotta meet both requirements. Okay, yes, way in back.
Quorum requirements apply to workshops?
Yes, because a workshop is a meeting, so you do need the quorum for the workshop. You're supposed to have a quorum for a workshop as well. Yes?
If a violation does occur, is there a penalty or fine, or what really happens?
Well, for the lack of a quorum as far as what you're doing, the only penalty is that action is null and void. For the quorum issue of violation of the Open Meetings Act, you can be personally fined. You as a member can be fined if it's found to be a willful violation of the Open Meetings Act. So that's a different kind of issue. So, yes?
What is the difference between a meeting and a workshop?
None. It's whatever you call it. The real difference is between a meeting and a public hearing. All meetings are public meetings. That's what this law says. Unless you hit one of these exceptions, which we haven't gotten to yet, it's got to be public. Everything's a public meeting, whether it's a public workshop, public work session, charrette, whatever you want to call it, it's a public meeting. From your internal process of what you're working on, again, not so much having anything to do with the Open Meetings Act, the difference is between a public meeting and a public hearing. At a public meeting, and what this law says is that everybody is entitled to show up and see and hear what you say and do. But they don't have any right to speak. Under the Open Meetings Act, the public has no right to speak at any meeting whatsoever. All they have is the right to see and hear what you do. What takes it to the next step is the various stuff where you have public hearings, which are your own particular enabling requirements if you've got it for an ordinance or a zoning hearing or whatever. The public hearing, or the budget committee's got a hearing on the upcoming, that's where people have the right to speak, as well as just see and hear what you say. They have a right to speak themselves. That's really the essential difference in the types of meetings. Public meeting versus public hearing. But everything, whether workshop or not, workshop, charrette, anything, are all public meetings. There isn't really a difference despite what you call it. Except, again, if you have internal rules. Some boards, would say, okay, a workshop we can't vote on. We don't pass motions or whatnot, workshops. But that's more your own rules than anything else. There's no fundamental difference in the overall requirements of the Open Meetings Act. As I said, this is basically, it's based on a paper society. It doesn't really encompass the internet. I was recently asked by another town, there's a board there, an advisory board, but what they want to do is basically set up, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, I'm assuming most of you are somewhat computer savvy, internet savvy, the idea of a listserv or a public bulletin board, where they would be able to continue the discussions that they were having their meeting, but they'd be able to have it online. And what I said is, I thought, as long as it's noticed properly, I think you could do that. As long as there are no votes or anything going on. If it's just the board members having that rolling quorum with one another and discussion back and forth, as long as it's posted to a public spot where anybody can see it, and you have sufficient publicly available computers in your library or schools or whatever so that anybody can see it, I think that complies with the spirit of the Open Meeting Act. So that you'd be going and everybody would be posting their things and their comments about it, and as long as you didn't take a vote, I think it'd be okay. As long as, again, the idea is the public should be able to see and hear what you're saying. Well, they can't see it per se if you're not meeting, but they can read it. If everybody can read what everybody else is saying, then that should meet the philosophical requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So my suggestion was that it would be. And then the cautious lawyer in me said we should also ask the Attorney General for an advisory opinion just to see what they say. And we haven't heard back from them yet. But I think that's something that will change over time. Eventually the law will catch up with the technology probably, and there will be more ability to do those sort of things. Let's talk briefly about minutes. Every public body is supposed to keep minutes. And I know this is a big bugaboo. Minutes are not a verbatim transcript of what everybody said. There's certain things you got to have in the meeting. You got to have who was there, what was discussed, any votes that were taken. You need to have who voted how on it. It's not enough to say motion passed 4-3. Your minutes have to say motion passed, 4 votes in the affirmative, Costa, Leonard, Bolin, Durfee, and 3 votes in the negative, Aruda and Lambert and Roderick. And I only did that to read it because I figured I'd forget somebody if I didn't do it that way. But the point is, you've got to have it there. It's not enough just to have the numbers. You got to know who actually voted how in your minutes. But that's it. You don't need a real detailed description of what the discussion is. If it went on for half an hour, you just need a summary of what the debate issues were. You don't need the whole details. Go ahead.
Are we required as of now to send our minutes to the Secretary of State, or is it just the agendas?
Yes and no. The statute would appear to only make school committees send their minutes to the Secretary of State. I think the Secretary of State is expecting everybody to do it, but the statute doesn't seem to apply to everybody. And if you hang on one second, I can just tell you where it says yeah, all public bodies, I'm sorry, not school committees, but, well, all public bodies within the executive branch, and by the way, you don't have this part of the statute in front of you, it's 42-46-7, and it says, it's subsection D and E. It says, all public bodies within the executive branch of the state government and all state public and quasi-public boards, agencies, and corporations shall keep official meetings, blah, 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 and shall file it with the Secretary of State. And then it goes on to say, E, all minutes required by this section to be filed with the Secretary of State shall be electronically transmitted, and so forth. And it was going to take effect a year after passage. So I think that the only one who's actually required by law to file minutes are those state agencies and bodies that do it, like the Lottery Commission and stuff like that. I think they're the ones that are the only ones that are required to do it. But certainly the Secretary of State's office, the way they've set up their website, seems to provide everybody the opportunity to do it. And a lot of municipal boards do send it as well. So I think the answer is you don't have to now. There's certainly no harm in doing it, but you don't have to do it now yet, the way it's worded. I think that will be probably something that would be corrected in the future too, though. As long as you're sending the agendas, we want you to send the minutes. One of the things about the minutes that's important is your unofficial minutes are supposed to be available 35 days after the meeting or whenever your next meeting is, whichever is sooner. I understand that's not always met. That's probably more likely not met than met lots of time. It's just the way it goes. It's a small town, a lot of volunteers. It's the way it is. The important thing to remember, though, is that the time limit in which someone can file a complaint against you is 180 days. That 180 days doesn't start until you file the minutes. So the sooner you file the minutes, the sooner you start that 180-day clock running. If you wait a year before you file the minutes, someone can file a complaint with you for an open meeting violation almost a year and a half after the meeting, because that clock didn't start until you approved and formally filed those minutes with your body. So that's a real incentive why you should not let minutes build up too long. Pardon me? Unofficial minutes are just that haven't been approved by the board. They haven't been submitted to the board for approval. Whoever took the minutes has them available, but they haven't been put on an agenda and approved. And those are public records. I've been talking for about an hour now. I'm gonna, with your permission, Mr. President, give everybody, if we take a little, just a 5-minute break, let everybody stretch and. But I really mean 5 minutes because I want to keep you on time. So let's all just take a little bit of a 5-minute break, stretch, wake up, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. Good reason we do these. Everybody learns something, even me. And I think one of the things that we've all learned, particularly to me tonight, is that we do have some confusion in the town about this posting of notices issue. So what the law talks about, the law says you're supposed to post it in 2 places, one of which is the place where the meeting is held. And I've had some people come up to me during the break, said they think that the town sergeant posts it up at the police station. That may be our second place. For what it's worth also, as I said, one of those places is supposed to be where the meeting is held. So if the meeting is held at the Judson Street Community Center, it could be posted there, and the second place could be here at the town. So let me just tell you that we will look into it, we'll investigate it, and try to find out, A, where they're being posted, and also send a communication to everybody in writing directing about how we should go about in the future, so we'll make sure we're all doing it the right way. Because clearly we're not all doing it the same way. Yes?
Should there not be a handbook of standard operating procedures for boards and whatever you call them in the town? It seems to me, I've been sitting here this evening, this is extremely chaotic. I mean, and you're not always available. And granted, you have given disclaimers at times and said, well, this is my opinion. Yes, and that's as valuable as your opinion. It seems to me that the Secretary of State's office should produce a handbook for the towns. There should be a glossary of terms that what does written or recorded in the Rhode Island general laws actually mean. Because I think it's extremely inappropriate to ask citizens in a town to volunteer for boards and commissions in the town and have unanswered questions constantly. There should be some uniform guide. This is chaotic. With all due respect to your excellent presentation, this is chaotic.
Well, I think there are some, I mean, the Secretary of State does have some things on their website as far as what they consider the guidelines. The Attorney General's office does produce a little booklet. I think Councilwoman Durfee there got it in her hand. They've got their version, but how many pages is it?
But it's better than none.
85.
85 pages of small type. It's there for you. I'm trying to summarize that in about 40 minutes worth of 2 hours with everything. So there does exist.
But then it should be in the hands of the members of the boards and commissions in the town. That's should be one of the outcomes of this admirable attempt to inform.
In fact, the Attorney General has been doing once a year, and I notice, could be coincidental with upcoming election cycle, but is actually doing now a second one coming up, I think, on January 15th. The Attorney General is doing another one of these seminars. I think Nancy, the clerk, has the handout from it. It's going to be in the town council packet. They're doing another one of these 3-hour presentations on just the Open Meeting Act alone. So there are things there. But I think you have a good idea. It might be nice to try to do a fairly compact, 10-page handbook to boards and commissions that would have this and provide it to everybody. Whenever he was a new member, we could get it. It's hard because every board and commission's a little bit different, but I think it's something we could certainly try to do.
But everyone certainly should have the Secretary of State's handbook and the Attorney Attorney General's handbook, however, 87 pages,
Yeah.
I'm sure that they're going to spend a long time in volunteering, they should be informed. I think this is totally inappropriate for the town to ask persons to volunteer and not be informed.
We're doing what we can. We're trying.
I understand that, but I think that, not you personally.
Okay. Yes.
Quick question. If you're on a board or commission that, because of the amount of information you're dealing with, establishes subcommittees, does the subcommittee have to meet under open meeting regulations, or can they just post, or do they have to post it, okay, the XYZ subcommittee of W Commission is going to be meeting such and such a place to discuss the...
Yes, they do fall under the Open Meetings Act. Whether you specifically need to have a separate notice on the Secretary of State's for a subcommittee, I don't think you do. The goal here, if you think about it, is to provide people notice of what's going on. The public should be able to go to the Secretary of State's website and sign up for the emails. It's great. You can sign up for the email, and they send you an email every time an agenda is posted of a particular board. You say, this is the boards I want the emails from, and they send it. Or you can go and search the filing bodies. So the public should be able to find out who's meeting when and what's on the agenda. That's what the goal is. I mean, one of the problems we had here, I think, was with the Budget Committee, and it got filed, but because it was at the beginning, there was a turnover, and it was done through the clerk, if you searched for it, it looked like a meeting of the town council. If you looked for a meeting of the Budget Committee, you didn't see it on the website because it was under the town council filing, login thing. So if you've got it, I mean, I think if you have a body that has subcommittees, I think it probably depends on how many. If you don't have a lot of subcommittees, 1 or 2 or something, I think it could be all filed under you. Just make sure you have a specific, make sure it's bold on the actual agenda itself, that this is a subcommittee, not the whole committee. I think it also makes just as much sense to set up a particular listing for the subcommittee. And then there's no question about it if it's a special listing for the subcommittee. But in answer to your basic question, the subcommittees are required to maintain and complete all of the legal requirements that any regular committee would be.
Even if they're not a quorum of the main committee?
Yes. That's my belief, because they're conducting the business. You're an official body. The subcommittee itself, even though they're not a quorum of the main body, they themselves have become a public body because they're providing advice, that advisory question. They're providing advisory information to the main body. So they become their own public body as a subcommittee, even if they don't have a majority of the members of the main body as their membership. Yes?
Secretary of State requires a listing of your meeting dates to be sent electronically at the beginning of the year.
Yes.
Who or what does that in the town of Tiverton? I've looked on the website because I do the agendas. It doesn't appear to be a place to send that in. How is that done? Who does that? Is that done by the clerk?
It's done by each one. The clerk did it for the town council. It's really the Secretary of State's thing. They don't have a particular thing. If you look at, I think it's like meeting for December 31st or meeting for January 1st is where it is. They don't, it's really their format. They don't provide a place for you to post it all. To post it, you have to just post it in your regular format. But that's where it is, because I know I got it and looked at it. So you just send it to them as if it's a regular meeting with that first date on it, and that complies with it. Again, ideally, their setup would be better, but they're constrained by finances and technology as well. So let's talk about some of the exemptions, okay? I want to at least get through the open meetings. Maybe we'll never not get to anything else tonight, but at least let's get through the open meetings and the reasons why it can be closed, which is really kind of the heart of it. I said it defines everything's open unless it meets one of these exemptions as to why it could be closed. And the first one is discussions of job performance, character, physical or mental health of a person or persons. So that's not any kind of that's not a collective bargaining. That's a whole separate section. This is for when you're dealing with an individual and you're reviewing their job performance, or you've got an issue, you're perhaps reviewing their mental performance and so forth, you have it. And the protection there, and this is where it starts balancing against the group versus the individual, that particular person or persons affected has to be notified in writing and advised that they may require this discussion to be held in open session. And the Attorney General is very strict about this. Some of you have heard me give you the Barrington example, where the Barrington Town Council and the Barrington Town Administrator were pretty much going their separate ways. They were getting ready to get rid of him, and he knew that they were going to get rid of him, and he was ready to go. And they held a meeting. They held a properly noticed meeting at which they were discussing his performance. And he arrived early because he had the keys to Town Hall. So he unlocked Town Hall, and he unlocked the door where room where they were meeting and turned on the lights and turned on the heat. And he told the solicitor, "I'll be in my office." And the solicitor asked him, "Do you want to attend? You know, you can attend." "No, I'll be in my office if they need me." So there's absolutely no question that he knew about it and he knew he had the rights. But it was an open meeting violation because he didn't get it in writing that told him he had the right to be there, to have it in open session. So it's a very technical thing, and consequently, you've probably seen it with the council here and so forth. If Nancy has a form, we actually we send them a letter telling them, and we ask them to sign it and give it back. So we actually got proof that they have the notice. It's not required. Nancy said to me, "What do I do if they don't send it back?" Doesn't matter, they don't have to send it back. All we have to do is notify it in writing. So if you're dealing with that, now this is not going to, it'll affect the school committee. I know there was an issue of the planning board as far as the planner. If there's something like that, you've got to make sure, if you're getting into that at all, you've got to comply with these requirements. You got to make sure that there's that written notice to the person that says, "We're going to be talking about your character. You have the right to hold this in an open meeting." It's the person who's being talked about who has the default. They can say, "I want this in an open meeting." If they don't say they want it in an open meeting, the board can't say, "Well, we want to do it in an open meeting." They've got to respect the privacy of that employee. They've got to keep it in private. It's the employee who has the right to make the call which way. Yes?
Personnel board doing interviews of a number of individuals, say firemen, 10 people. They should get a letter beforehand.
What context are you interviewing? In hiring, they're not yet employees of the town. I would say that they probably should get a letter that says they have the right to have it in open session if they want it.
Normally, we've been advising them that it can be an open session or closed session. We hold all our interviews in closed session.
Okay. You should be sending them that note and letter. It can be a form letter, but you should be sending it to them in writing. As I said, I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to my own partner with that situation of, the manager down the hall, and they said, "Nope, it's a violation. The law says writing, you got to give it to him in writing." So that's what I now tell everybody else. You got to give it to them in writing. Next exemption is pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation. And then it says, or work sessions pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation, which is kind of redundant because, as I pointed out before, there really isn't a difference. It's a meeting or it's not. So let's take it separately. Collective bargaining is collective bargaining. That's not individual contracts. That's where you're bargaining with a group of people, so it's pretty much usually a union. I suppose you could have collective bargaining with a non-union association, but haven't seen it. So all your sessions, that can be closed. Litigation sessions can be closed. Now, got to be careful here. You don't have to have a lawsuit actually filed in court. There doesn't have to be a complaint served to say, "Oh, it's litigation." But by the same token, you can't just say, "Well, we might get sued on this. We think this guy is going to sue us on this matter, so we better have this in executive session." It has to be more than just a generalized suspicion that there might be litigation. There has to be some reason. If this person has sued you 5 times before, and 3 of those cases are still pending in court, that's enough to say, okay, this is litigation. But it can't just be, "Well, this is a tough one, we might get sued, or this one might get appealed, we better meet in executive session for litigation." So that's something that you need to be careful of. Make sure that there is a matter. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is permissive. It
says may be closed, so it is not required.
That's correct. You could absolutely, you could discuss collective bargaining in public. You could discuss litigation in public. The first one, and then again, I mean, this is, we get into the conflicts, we haven't gotten to the open records part, but information about individuals is protected by their right of privacy, which is why this job performance, character, and so forth, this is permissive, but the option is to the employee because their basic right of privacy. But once you've taken that aspect out and you're not dealing with someone's right of privacy, it is permissive. It can all be in public. And I think you've seen that in some situations with the council. Some of the litigation stuff we discuss in public to let people know what's going on, what's the status of cases, where it's just an update of what's going on in public information. Where it's tactics and strategy, where that public information would be, you know, the value would be lost if it were done publicly, then it's held in executive session. 3 is pretty simple, matter of security. That's something that's executive session. 4, investigative proceedings regarding allegations of misconduct. And I think you need to read that together with there's a later one if you go down to, I'm sorry, it needs to be read in the investigative proceedings needs to be read in conjunction with the public records aspect, which talks about how the final decision of an administrative body needs to be public. So if they're doing an investigation of misconduct, civil or criminal, they're not subject to the open meetings laws. They can meet in executive session. But what they finally come up with is available as an open record. So need to be thinking of that. Number 5, acquisition or lease of real property. That's pretty simple. You don't want to be having public notice if you're planning on buying or leasing something. And the second part of that, selling it. If you're disposing of public property, you don't want your discussion of how much do we think we can sell this for to be held in public. 7 is the investment of public funds is similar to that. And including but not limited to the state lottery plans for new promotions. Obviously, that was added later to this act, dealing with that. They're worried about other state lotteries were going to steal their ideas and their gimmicks if they had it in a public meeting. 8 pertains to school committees and disciplinary hearings or reviewing matters relating to privacy of students and so forth. And it actually kind of mirrors what you have if you're talking about the character, performance, and fitness of an employee. Basically, you got to give them the written notice of that's going on, advance in writing of what the charges are, and that they have the option, in this case the student, to have it in an open session. It's really a mirror image. 9 are hearings or discussions of grievances filed pursuant to a collective bargaining. The grievance obviously is a private matter. Although, again, when we get to the open records, that final decision, the decision on the grievance is going to end up being a public record, even though it might not have been resolved through open meetings. And finally, 10, which actually may come into play here in this town, is discussion of personal finances of a prospective donor to a library. So for those of you who are working on raising money for the new library, you can meet. I'm going to just wait while Nancy changes the tape. You can meet in public. You can meet in private executive session to talk about the donor. And the way I read it too, it's interesting. It doesn't just say any discussion of a prospective donation to a library. It says personal finances of a prospective donor. So it makes me think that there was an individual case here. There was someone who promised a lot of money to a library, and they wanted to find out whether that person really had the money to make good or not or whatnot. And the way it's written makes me think that there was someone somewhere. There's probably an interesting story behind that somewhere. Yes?
If the board votes to close the meeting like we just discussed, are there specific rules limiting or guiding them on who they can invite into that meeting? Should it just be them and say you if it's a legal thing? Or how do they decide who's actually privileged to go into that meeting if the public has been excluded under these conditions you just read?
Well, there's 2 things. First of all, there are specific requirements of what the board, the body has to do to go into executive session. they have to, what's called an open call. They have to, in an open meeting, say, we are going into executive session. And they have to cite the specific subsection of 45-46-5, which applies as to why they're going into executive session. And they can only discuss the particular items that they went into executive session for. If they went into executive session for litigation, and then they start talking about collective bargaining while they're there, even though that's a permissible item for an executive session, if it wasn't noticed, then you're not supposed to be talking about it. You're only supposed to be talking about the particular item that you went into executive session on. So that has to be proper. And then again, if you were dealing with the personnel aspect where you were providing notice to an employee or to a student, you're supposed to note that specifically in the minutes. Yes, we provided notice to them. As to who can be invited in with the executive session, it is basically up to the body itself. And it would depend on what the situation is. Normally, the clerk or staff is included, because oftentimes that's the person doing the minutes. You still need minutes for an executive session, even if you're going to seal them later. There are supposed to be minutes of what's discussed. And then it may depend. If you're negotiating, perhaps settling a lawsuit, you might have principals and attorneys from the other side sitting there meeting with you. If you're discussing buying open space for preservation, members of the Open Space Committee or the Land Trust might be in there. If you're discussing library financing, the library committee, the librarian from the town might be in there. It all depends there, and it's up to the particular body. And just because they invite someone in, that doesn't automatically make it an open session. It's still an executive session. It's just their choice as to who to invite in to conduct their proper business. Obviously, if you invite in a member of the press, then I'd say you've eliminated the executive session, and at that point, you need to make it completely public. Yes?
Does the item that you're going to be discussing during a closed meeting need to be in the agenda, or anytime during the meeting, someone can say we're going to have a closed meeting on this certain topic?
No, it should be in the agenda. It should be on the agenda, yes. The only exception to that would be adding something to the agenda. And basically, school committees have different rules, including publication, so I'm not going to get into that at this point. But the basic rule on adding something to the agenda is you can add agenda items, but only for discussion or referring them to another body, unless there's a finding that it is basically, it's an emergency matter, it's a time-sensitive matter, and that there will be a public harm if it's not dealt with immediately. So you could have something, you could have a situation, you know, if you get a lawsuit the day before and it's got to be answered, you know, there's the temporary restraining order hearing or something, you could have situations where you would have something added to the agenda, or even an emergency meeting, which is a whole nother issue, which I wasn't going to get into quite that detail yet. It's in the statute, you can read it yourself. But basically the rule is you should have that on your thing. Executive session, collective bargaining. Executive session, litigation. If you're not sure, put it on. That's my motto. In fact, the clerk will tell you. It's always there. I say, unless you hear from me otherwise, always put executive session litigation, because unfortunately we got a lot of litigation. I'm almost always have something to report in executive session on litigation. If not, when we get to that part of the meeting, I'll say, nope, we don't need it. It's easier that way than to do it. Other stuff we put on as it. And I hope we will someday get to the time where I don't have to do that with litigation either. Yes?
How detailed do you have to get with the posting for, say, litigation? Do you have to put what the case is, or can you just generally put litigation?
Well, I believe you can put litigation. The Attorney General's office has some advisory opinions that suggest you should put the name of the case down. My view is that litigation is enough. When you're doing collective bargaining, you should put at least the particular union of which you're bargaining with, but you don't have to put anything further than that. If you're dealing with, you know, other matters, again, like security, you wouldn't you wouldn't put, you know, security surveillance cameras, secret hidden surveillance cameras outside police station on the agenda item. You just put security. So my feeling is that the litigation is applying the same way. That you, if you want it to be a confidential thing that you're meeting on, I mean, sometimes you really don't even want the other side to know that you're talking about it. So to put the case down is giving away important strategic information. You might disagree. I'm sure you would rather, and I always try, you know, where available, I try to do it. My view is, if I can, I try to do it publicly and not in executive session. So, yes, is there another one? Okay. Let's talk about public records, because this is the other big half of this, and as I've already said a couple of times, they have to be read in it. The basic idea about public records is the same as the public meeting. Your default is it's a public record, unless it comes under one of these exceptions, which says it's not a public record. It's the whole idea the public should be able to see and hear what the public business is being done by its government officials. Same idea, the public should be allowed to read the documents of how its business is being conducted, unless they are specifically defined as non-public. And again, I've got the whole chapter down here at the front if you want to pick it up. If those copies all are gone, the clerk can provide you with additional ones. But we did put in the materials the exceptions, since that's basically the way it's defined. The first thing to note is it doesn't matter what format it is. It doesn't have to be a piece of paper to be a public record. It can be a videotape, can be an audio tape, can be a DVD, can be a CD-ROM, can be just something on your hard drive with email. It could be something, it could be an email on a Google server out in California. Doesn't matter what the format is. It's more the context where it becomes, which make it a public record. The first major exception are those personnel issues. The same thing that allows that person, if you're going to have a discussion of job performance, their privacy rights, they can have it in private if they want. It's up to them to decide public or not. It's the same thing, the records. Basically, individually identifiable information. And it's there on page 7 about all the stuff, clients, students, so forth, personal finances, welfare, all that stuff. What it does is they give you the exception to the exception. They say all this personnel stuff is not, everything's public except all this personnel stuff which is not public. Oh, and except what will be public will be, if you're a public employee, your name, the gross salary, the salary range, the total cost of the paid fringe benefits, the gross amount received in overtime and other remuneration in addition to salary, the job title, job description, dates of employment, and positions held with the municipality, and the work location and business telephone number, and the city or town of residence, not the street, and date of termination if they're a former employee. All that's public. You have the right, if anybody's on the public payroll, you have the right to know that information about them. Beyond that, basically you don't. The rest of their information, including what street they live on, and their home phone number, and going all the way up to their social security number, you don't have the right to that. But those enumerated list of things, you have the right to know that information of anybody who's receiving a public salary. In addition to which, you have the right to know all about their pension records if they joined the system after June 17th, 1991. That was part of the reform after all the General Assembly little private pension deals. Part of this was saying, okay, from this point forward, all the pension records are public as well. So other than medical condition information or beneficiaries, all pension records are public. So that would apply as well. Other things that are not public are, as you might expect, trade secrets, child custody, adoption, stuff that wouldn't be available by law in a court, scientific technological secrets, security plans, records that disclose the contributor of a bona fide and lawful charitable contribution to a public body whenever public anonymity has been requested with respect to that. So that ties into the library. Not only can you talk about that donor in public, But if you've got someone who wants to give you money and he says, I want it to be anonymous, or she says, I want it to be anonymous, I'll give you $1 million for the library. I don't want people to know I have that much money. I'm a school teacher. I've worked for 50 years. I've made good investments, and I sold it just before the market crashed, so I can afford it. But I don't want all these people knowing that I think I have all this money, and all my relatives will come. I want it to remain anonymous forever. Well, you can do it, and here's the provision too. The records can remain sealed as well. And I was actually involved with someone where there was $1 million anonymous contribution for public property, became public open space, and for several years kept suggesting to the donor, wouldn't you like people to know about it? No, the donor has died. So I'm forced to keep that information secret. That's the way it goes. But you do have the right to do it here. I skipped over the stuff about law enforcement, and this relates to the fact it talks about records maintained by law enforcement, but it accepts records relating to management and direction of the agency, which, if you think of it, makes sense. The stuff that just relates to how we're running the police department as opposed to who we're arresting, the stuff as to how we're running it is public. And that the records reflecting the initial arrest of an adult are public. And that's something I think you know, that's always an issue that comes up. The police report, the arrest record is public. The investigation reports are not. The other exceptions, again, are kind of what you'd expect, strategy of negotiation involving labor things. Those are tying into the same things that we dealt with the open meeting. If you can talk about it in private, you can usually keep the paper private. The open records, though, gets to the idea that when something's done, those records no longer remain sealed. They become public documents. If you look at sub I on page 9, reports of strategy of negotiations with respect to investment of borrowing of public funds until such time as those transactions are entered into. Okay? Or the issue of P down there, investigatory records of public bodies. But other than the final actions taken, that becomes the public record. There's also this exception K for preliminary drafts, notes, impressions, memoranda. However, that any documents submitted at a public meeting of a public body shall be deemed public. And this is where we come full circle to that question about sending something around to all the other planning board members and whatnot. So technically, this preliminary draft that's being sent around wouldn't necessarily be public. But then you're violating the open meeting law. So that's why, in order to, because you're considering this information and you're using it in your deliberations without it being publicly available. So that's why it's important to get it in the public record, get it to the planner, get it to the clerk, get it to your secretary, so it becomes part of the record. And then you've also complied with this part of the public record. Even if that's a preliminary draft, it becomes a public document once it's conveyed to the public body. So there's that symmetry there. And again, the basic rule is, unless it's a particular exception, it's public. And even these preliminary notes and drafts, if you're just going to make a preliminary note and not do anything with it, then fine, it's not public. But let's say you're going to write out, perhaps you're going to make some notes. You've heard the case, you finished the case, you closed the hearing last month, and now you're going to reconvene this month and someone's going to make a motion, and you think you may make a motion, and you draft up some language. Well, if you're going to read that at the meeting, then that piece of paper that you read really should be going into the record. That's part of a public document because it's what you used in your consideration. That if it's only you and you just scribbled it out, then you don't have to make it available ahead of time. If you're circulating it all, then you're violating the open records. If it's your staff member that's doing it and circulating it, that's fine as long as it's available to the applicant. If the staff member or your lawyer draws up a draft decision, that's fine. He can send that draft decision out to all of you, even by email, and say, here's the draft decision for next week's decision, as long as you CC the developer and say, here's our proposed draft decision. They don't have any right to change it, but they have the right to see it and know what it is that's being considered. Sorry, there was a question.
When you say make it part of the public record, does that mean that the secretary attaches it to the appropriate minutes of the meeting would be discussed at, or?
Yes.
It gets,
Yes,
it
or-
gets attached to the minutes?
It gets attached to the minutes if you don't have, or if you keep a particular file by matter, it should go in that file. If you've got a particular, lot of the boards that would have cases before them or applicants, you'd have a file for the Jones Farm and a file for the Smith House or whatever, you would have it in that particular file. If you've just got your minutes, then yep, just attach it to the minutes. Nothing fancy is required, just that it's available. So if someone says, could I see it? You gotta, yeah, okay, here's all the stuff from the meeting of last June 3rd. There's the minutes, and there's a couple of, copies of emails that got sent to all the members by the secretary. It's all there. Yeah.
If they have to request a document specifically, or can they say, I just want to see your file on this, no matter how big it is, and just go through it?
The latter. They can say, yeah, I want to see everything about the June 3rd meeting, or I want to see everything about New England development, or I want to see everything about the industrial park. They have the right to see it. Now, there are reasonable requirements and so forth getting in. The town has time in which to respond to it, and a reasonable charge can be made. But in the end, if it's there and it's been used in the public process, it's a public document, and if it's a public document, the public has the right to see it. Although they may have to pay for copying and they may have to pay for research up to at $15 an hour, although the first hour is free. The cost of the providing the records must be reasonable. We're actually getting into this now, the question about electronic stuff. And the basic rule is if you don't have the document in a particular format, you're under no obligation to provide it in that format. If someone says, I'd like you to give me PDF copies of all the documents, and you don't have it, then you don't, all you've got is a big box, then you don't have to give them PDF documents. You don't have to take them out and scan it. You can hand them the box and say, here, tell me whatever you want. Here's a box, here's a pack of Post-it notes, put one on whatever you want a copy of, and I'll make a copy of it. On the other hand, if you've got it in your computer already, if your habit is to scan all your stuff in as PDF documents, and some places do that. You go to the Westerly Town Council, and every one of them's got a laptop open in front of them, and the clerk, the entire council document is all online and all available, and everybody's there with laptops. If it's available electronically, if you've done that, if you've scanned it all in, and they ask for it that way, you have to provide it that way. And then the question comes, well, what's the cost? What's my cost of sending them an email attaching these PDF documents? It's nothing. Well, then it's nothing, then you've got to provide the information for nothing. And what we're seeing is a couple of public interest groups out there in Rhode Island who are asking for all this municipal information, including a lot of financial information. And the fact is, it's public, it needs to be provided. And to the extent the towns have it electronically, we have to provide it. And if you think about it, it's actually easier for us to do it electronically and not have to go copying all that stuff. So don't be afraid of having it electronically, but remember, you only have to provide it the way you have it. I suppose if you only have it electronically and somebody said, well, but I don't have a computer, I want a hard copy, then you could print it and you could charge them 15 cents a page for printing out your PDFs. But you don't have to go the other way. If you keep stuff in Word and they say, yeah, but I like WordPerfect, can you convert it to me for WordPerfect? The answer is no. I don't have to. I mean, if you can easily, there's nothing, you could convert it to WordPerfect if you want to, but you don't have to. Your response can be, no, I can either email it to you as a Word document, or you can come, I'll print it out and you can come pick it up for 15 cents a page. You don't have to make the changes for them. I'm going to move on from records unless there's other questions, because I want to talk about the slight issue of ethical behavior. But I'm going to really be specific about it. But ethical behavior. I have a test that I apply, and I urge you all to adopt. I used to call it the Providence Journal test, but I suppose I should call it the Providence Journal, Newport Daily News, Fall River Herald, and Secana Times test, which is, if what you're doing were to appear on the headline of the paper tomorrow, how would you feel about it? Are you going to feel uncomfortable? Are you going to feel, gee, I don't want someone to see that? And if you're, a squirrel, if you don't have any conscience, how about your wife or your mother or your daughter? How am I going to feel if they see this on the front page of the paper tomorrow, what I'm going to do? And if you follow that test 99% of the time, and you don't do it, if you would in any way feel uncomfortable about it, then if you don't do it, then 99% of the time you will comply with the ethics requirements. Because that's really mostly all what it is common sense. And the key elements on the ethics is not doing something where you would receive a financial benefit or a financial detriment as well, based on your official action, or beyond that where there be the appearance of that, even if you wouldn't get any benefit, if there would be the appearance of that, the appearance of impropriety. Those really are the key things with the ethics issues. If you are going to be having some connection with what you're voting is going to allow you some financial gain. And when I say you, that also, by the way, applies to your family. And the General Assembly, the Ethics Commission, the General Assembly did it with the Constitutional Convention. Now the Ethics Commission does it themselves. They keep expanding the definition of family. It does include nephews and nieces and uncles and sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws. So you could hate your brother-in-law and despise him and think he's a ne'er-do-well. And he's coming before you, and if you grant him this, you hate the guy. You really don't want to give him this. You don't want to vote in approval of what he's asking for. But that's a conflict, because there is that. In fact, it could be the same way. You could be voting no because you hate him, and that's it. There's a financial detriment to a family member because of what you do. That's really the key. It also applies to business associates as well. It also applies if you're representing someone else. You can't represent someone else in front of your body at all. The only exception is there can be a hardship exception if you are representing yourself over your own residence. Then you can go, and you can't vote on it obviously, but at least you can appear before the board. Now, I've told you the problem. What's the solution? It's this fancy old Anglo-Saxon legal term from Latin called recusal. And you need to recuse yourself, which means you're not going to participate in the decision. And we get into some technical things here that's like, okay, you have to fill out a form in duplicate. Why in duplicate? Because that's what the law says. You got to fill out this form that says, I've got this conflict of interest. And either A, I think I can still rule on this, which would not be recusing, because it's not, you put down the reasons why. Or B, I am recusing myself because my brother-in-law is the applicant. And you have to give one, again, to this person who's your secretary, the clerk, the staff member to the board. It goes in the record. It goes there with the minutes. Here's the recusal form. And another copy of it gets sent to the Rhode Island Ethics Commission. Okay? You do that, you're protected. Okay? Recusal also means get up and leave the table. Don't just slide back in your chair, or don't just say you're not going to say anything. It doesn't mean just not voting. There's a difference between abstaining, which is if you're just not going to vote. You can still participate in discussion and whatnot and decide, well, maybe I missed some of the early meetings on this. If it's not something like a zoning board, which requires you to be present for every member thing, you just feel, okay, I'll abstain. That's different. But if you're recusing, you get out of there completely. You're not participating at all. I think many of you here remember Jane Cabot down in Little Compton. Jane was pretty powerful in the town for a long time, and she had to recuse herself one time. But you know what she did? She went and she sat in the front row, and she basically sent signals to people on the council from the front row with her body language. Now, she wasn't found to have been guilty of a violation, but she did have to defend herself against the complaint. It was a close one. So if you're recusing yourself, best thing to do, leave the building. If you can, get it scheduled at the end, so the item you got to recuse yourself is at the end of the night. You leave, go home. Get out of the room. At the very least, go to the back of the room. Don't sit in the front. Don't stay there. You want to get away from it. Now, you do have a right. You do have, there's what they call the public participation exception. You got your basic First Amendment right to speak on something. So you can theoretically get up from this side of the table and walk over here, and then when everybody's talking, if it's a public hearing, get up and speak and talk about it. But only with the same rights as a member of the public. For example, you wouldn't have the right to go in an executive session if you've recused yourself about a matter. You're out of it, you're just a member of the public. And even then, the public participation, it can't be anything where you'd be representing anybody's other's interest or representing your financial interest unless it's for you and your home. That's the exception where you're able to speak about it. So that's the key. The recusal is the key, and don't be half-hearted about it. Make sure you do what you can to get away, because it's that appearance. You don't want people to think, oh, he recused, but he's still calling the shots on the decisions. You wanna get away from there. People were asking me about quorums. We had a long discussion of quorums earlier. I will note we discussed abstaining does not affect a quorum. Someone can abstain from a vote, that doesn't affect your quorum at all. Recusal does. Recusal takes away your quorum. So if you're down to 4 members, you got a conflict, and suddenly there's only 3 out of 7 because one person recused, then you've lost your quorum. Obviously, that's a problem, and for example, the boards have had that lately with the Tiverton Yacht Club, with so many members being members of it, and had to go to the Ethics Committee and request advisory opinions. That's the other thing you can do. You can request an advisory opinion of the Ethics Committee, of the Ethics Commission, and that's the other way to protect yourself. Now, I got to warn you, there's two things to watch out for. One is you can talk to your lawyer about it, and for the most part, I can't advise you. You have to talk to your own lawyer. If you're charged with any ethical violation, the town solicitor cannot represent you. It's a personal thing. You need your own lawyer. The town council can decide or not if they're going to, or the interlocal can decide if they're going to defend you. But as a lawyer, my representation is with the town, and the Ethics Commission has said this because it came up. They said, nope, the town solicitor can't defend people when they're charged with these ethical violations. You can ask for advice, obviously, that's what I'm here, and I can say, and usually my advice is going to be, get an advisory opinion. And here's how you do it, here's who you talk to, here's how you send the letter to. But watch out even with advisory opinions. You talk to staff, that's what you do in the first instance. You can call them up, you can talk to someone. They tell you what they think. Staff might even put it in a letter. That's not binding until the actual commission itself votes. The only real protection is when the Ethics Commission votes and decides, okay, yep, rule of necessity applies, or no, there isn't a conflict and whatnot. You will be protected. I don't think you'll be fined or anything like that if you've sought a staff opinion, and if for some reason the exigencies of time required you go forward before waiting till the next monthly meeting of the Ethics Commission. You won't be found to have a willful violation if you sought out the advice. But the only true protection you can get is a formal opinion of the Ethics Commission when they're sitting with a quorum, with their matter properly, your matter properly before them, and they vote. That's the only real true protection you can have. You do all the other things, I don't think you're going to get fined, you won't get willful violations, but you need to go all the way. You can't just make the phone call and say, oh, yeah, I talked to some girl on the phone and she said it was okay, I could vote. That's not going to help you at all. Talking to me and I give you a letter and say it doesn't appear that there's a conflict, but I recommend that you seek an advisory opinion, that's probably not going to help you either. So you want to be ready. There may, if you've got a problem, and this comes back to what I was saying at the beginning. If you've got that doubt, then just recuse. Don't, unless there's a real problem where, you know, we're just not going to have a quorum, we only got 2 members left, and we have to have a batch of advisory opinions. Most of the time it doesn't matter. Most of the time we have enough board members, we have enough alternates. Your recusal isn't going to make a difference. When in doubt, recuse. That's basically the safe way to do it. The final thing I just want to warn about here is ex parte communication. Because this kind of cuts across both the meetings and the records part. of what happens with this stuff outside the normal scope. We've talked about talking to your fellow board members or council members in the reply all, but what about the public? What do you do when you're at the coffee shop and someone in the public comes up and starts telling you all about how you should vote on a particular matter? And I got to tell you, there is a fundamental dichotomy there. If you're a town councilor, it's different. You got a duty to listen to the public when they come up, and you got to listen to them. That's what they voted. They voted. You ran on different platforms. If you're a member of a zoning board, if you're a member of a planning board, where you're considering a quasi-judicial matter before you, you shouldn't be hearing any of it. The rest of you are probably somewhere in between. But we've put forward some advice here that basically you should be telling people, if someone wants to come up and tell you what they think about something, you should say, look, you know, I'm really glad to see that you're so concerned about it. You should come to the meeting Monday night and speak about it. Oh, I can't be there, I'm going to be away. Well, why don't you send a letter or send an email to the clerk with your feelings, and we'll see that it gets on the record. Do that. Try to get that. If it keeps going on, no, I'm not going to be there, but I'm going to do it, you say, well, I will tell people that you spoke to me. You yourself get it at the record as the town councilor or as the board member say, I just want to disclose. At the beginning, I just want to disclose. So-and-so came up to me at the donut shop and told me that there were real problems with the wetlands of this and they weren't done properly. I don't know if the board wants to do anything further or not, but this is what was presented to me. Get it out there in the public. Don't let it remain as a hidden outside channel of communication. And oftentimes, just when you tell someone, that'll be enough. If you're going to say, look, if you're going to keep talking to me and you're not going to put it in writing and you're not going to come to the hearing, then I'm going to announce publicly that that we had this conversation. And if they don't want to have it public, then it's not the kind of conversation they should be having with you at all if they're afraid of having it in public. So you need to be leery of that. The same thing if you're getting unsolicited emails. If it's something, when in doubt, that's a good example to forward it on, not to everybody on your board, forward it to your secretary, forward it to the clerk. Say, okay, I got this email on this matter, forward it to that person who will therefore collect it. It becomes in the record. It's an official part of the communication. It's not an ex parte communication. It's not a problem. Keep it in those official channels. Keep it through that one person. Ed's board commission, you should decide, if you don't already have that person, who is it going to be? Who's going to be that channel of communication, your secretary or your clerk or whatever, who will do it, and get that information to them. Yes.
If you get that unsolicited email,
yes,
do you have to at least notify that person that you'll be forwarding it on to the appropriate person?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if they're sending someone to you as a public official, then they're basically putting it in the public place. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't just hit delete. If you're not paying any attention to it, you just want to hit delete, that's fine. But if you're going to do anything with it, then you should forward it on officially. And I would say that by someone sending you an email about a public issue, they have consented to it being in the public eye. And if they shouldn't, and this goes out to the people on TV too, then don't do it. If you're not willing to see it on the front page of the paper tomorrow, don't email your town councilor or your conservation commission member or your budget committee member about what you think about it if you're not willing to let it be seen public, because all of the public's business should be done in public, not private. And on that note, I'm going to stop and take any last questions, and I'll also hang around. I'm not going to keep anybody here, but I'll hang around for a bit too. So, go ahead.
Are there any differences?
I will just ask for the benefit of the taping, if you are leaving, that's fine, but just try to be quiet about it so people can still hear when they're watching the tape later. Go ahead.
As far as open meetings and all the procedures you've been discussing, are there any differences for a site visit as opposed to a meeting in a town hall?
Sort of. That was kind of at the end there. And a site visit is still a public meeting. And it has to be noticed. It has to comply with all the notice requirements. And again, if your board is going to go on a site visit, the public should have the right to go with you on the property. Now, sometimes you'll have a property owner that says, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let the public come on my property. Well, then you can say, well, then we're not going to have a site visit, and we're going to draw inferences against you. If we can't see it ourselves, then we're going to draw negative inferences. This is the way we do it. We have site visits, and the public is allowed to come along. Now, the key is the earlier question that you asked. public meetings versus, or you didn't ask the question, I answered the question like a politician. I answered the answer I wanted to give. Public meetings, public hearings, those are the real differences. A site visit should be a public meeting. It should not be a public hearing. When you go on the site visit, the only people who should be doing the talking would be the members of the board, and perhaps you've got the applicant there if he's pointing things out to you. And it should be done in the way so that the public can hear it. So if the applicant says, well, over there you can see that brook, and it's just a beautiful, pristine brook, the people who came along on the site visit should be able to hear that. They should not be able to speak up right then and there and say, no, wait a minute, that's not pristine. That's fouled with pollution from his gravel operation up the road. But they should be able to hear it during the site visit, so when you come back next month with a public hearing, then they can raise it and say, well, at the site visit, he told you that was a pristine brook. It really isn't. That's what you want to do. That's kind of the difference. You never want to have a public hearing on a site visit, and you want to make sure your public meetings, your public site visits are accessible. 99% of the time, you're going to get nobody coming along on a site visit anyway. And, you know, or 98%. And 1% of the time, you'll get a couple of people coming along. And then 1% of the time, you might have, you know, 25 or 50 people who want to come to the site visit. And that's when you're going to have to make special arrangements or decide to skip the site visit. Yes?
In regarding public gifts, tickets to equipment shows, a vendor comes in, gives you calendars, pens. I'm not talking about Bruins tickets or Patriots tickets, but you know, stuff like that. Is there a dollar value, or is there some guide to accepting gifts, I want to say?
Yes, I believe that the limit's $25 now. Anything over $25 is forbidden. And essentially anything that would be a quid pro quo. I mean, if you're going to pave a sidewalk for $20, then yes, even a $20 gift is wrong. But basically $25 is the limit on the gift. So if anyone gives you anything over $25, you should be turning it back.
Equipment shows, like twice a year, all vendors have these big, they want to sell you equipment, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they give you a ticket, and you go there, and you have a luncheon. It could be over $25. I mean, how do you handle situations like that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there's a difference if it's a show in Braintree that you're driving to, or it's a show in Florida in January that they're paying you tickets to go to, okay? You know, I don't think that the value of the tickets is really something that I would consider a pure gift in that case. If they're saying you're going to a show and looking at it, then that's probably it. If they're giving you a lunch or whatnot, if while you're at the show you're going to the hospitality suite of Acme backhoes, and then they got champagne and caviar, you should turn around and walk out. If they got hot dogs and Coke, then it's probably okay. If there's any question, again, you know, I take the conservative route. If there's any question, the answer is, you know, well, no thanks for the tickets. I'll pay for my own tickets. Thank you anyway. Or if they're giving you the tickets, perhaps the tickets come from the organization, and just, you know, don't take anything from the individual vendors. And if you have, then the other thing too is if you go to the show, next week, and you go into Acme Backhoe's hospitality suite and have a batch of caviar and whatnot, and then in February you put out an RFP for or a bid proposal for backhoes, and they come in, when you're submitting the thing, okay, I recommend we take the bid for Acme, or maybe it's for the other company, you want to have a note, you know, please note that I attended the show on January 15th with tickets paid for by Acme. Disclose it. And possibly recuse yourself and say, you know, I can't decide on this backhoe. I'm going to have my subordinate make the decision because I do it. Or just, the main thing is disclosing. If there's nothing else that you leave here tonight, realize that's really the key of all of this stuff. That it be done in the public, that the public can know what it is that went into your decisions. That for the open meetings, they can have notice of when you're going to have the meetings and then see and hear what you're doing, and that the records, that they can read what you've done. And the same thing there even on the ethics. I didn't even get into the Ethics Commission filing forms. I think everybody knows that. I'll remind everybody, your Ethics Commission, you're all required to file that form. It's usually the last Friday in April, about April 28th or 30th, there's a form. And it's just like taxes. It doesn't matter if they send it to you or not. You're responsible for filing it. So if April 15th, this is a good way to remember it, if by tax day you have not received a form from the Ethics Commission, call them, write them, go to their website and download it, but get the form and file it. Again, it's disclosure. They want to know, it's not that you're not allowed to have, you could own 20% of Acme Backhoe. It's not so much that you own it or not, it's the people know about it. When you're recommending that Acme Backhoe's bid be accepted, do they know that you own 20% of the company or not? That's really the key. That's the key here, the knowledge that the public has the right to know what's going on. Other? Yes?
Just a brief comment, I think, to emphasize some things that were said. It might be useful not to have a comment of the 80-page book that Louise has, but maybe a 1 to 5 page summary of how we specifically implement these things in Tiverton. That site number 2 is the library, that the town sergeant is responsible for posting, or whatever it is. That we have something like that just to benefit the various boards and commissions.
We're definitely going to follow that up on the notice thing. We will come up with that and have that officially on the notice. Again, that's why these things are good. They bring to light issues, problems, stuff that we didn't know about. We're all doing it in our own separate way. We all thought it was the right way, and it may be the right way, but it's still, we should have a uniform process. So we'll do that. Well, thank you all for coming and staying awake. And I urge, if you want more information, and particularly the land use, come to the one later in the month.